Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar with the topic of the future of digital and connected healthcare. Very interesting and exciting focus since it's impacting hugely on everybody's access and usage of the services provided by the healthcare, as well as having a profound impact on the workplace within the healthcare sector itself. Before moving on, just a few practicalities. For your information, we are recording this session, and it will be placed live on YouTube tomorrow, and we will as well provide you with the link afterwards accordingly. Regarding timing, Rina will do her presentation for the coming 30-40 minutes, and all participants will be muted during this session. And should you have any comments or questions, please be so kind as to send them via the Q&A function in the bottom, and we will then take them afterwards during the Q&A session, which will take another 15 minutes. I'm Lone Rørvig. I'm a senior principal at Spengler Fox, global executive search company. And besides executive search, we also provide leadership advisory, including leadership transition, outplacement, RPOs, and so forth. One of the largest market research companies, Ipsos, has followed the development within the digital and connected healthcare over the years, collecting the data, studying the trends, and putting them into context. I'm really happy to introduce today's speaker, Rina Sanga. Rina is heading Ipsos's Global Center of Expertise in digital and connected health. And I will let Rina introduce herself more in detail in a minute. Just still mentioning that I'm so very impressed by the passion that Rina and her team is putting behind this topic, and indeed looking forward to hear this presentation. Rina, the floor is all yours, and looking forward, as said.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction, and hi everyone. My name is Rina Sanga. I head up digital and connected health at Ipsos, and my entire career has been in healthcare. I only have worked in healthcare. And my day-to-day is spent talking to doctors and talking to patients and trying to understand what makes them tick, what will really help adoption. We have a huge issue with dropout of usage of things like digital health and connected health, and we try to understand what the reasons and rationales are behind that. For the next 35-40 minutes or so, I'm going to be walking you through some of the bigger trends that we're seeing across healthcare, and please do ask questions and use the Q&A button for that. It's always more interesting when you ask those things as well. So when we look at healthcare, it's without a doubt one of the most, health is very personal, it's extremely important, we know that. But what's really interesting is the consumerization of health. This wonderful big wheel that I'm showing on screen is available online in more detail. It's our global trends framework. So we do a global trend survey among consumers each year. And the call out really here is this whole thing around choices over health becoming a huge, not just a trend, but a signal around how behaviors are going to adopt and change in healthcare. Issues that we need to really think about are trust in medicine. I think what's happening with the vaccination program right now is some of that kind of underlying, how do we instill trust behind the products that we launch? How do people believe the benefit statements that we put out there? Also more health self-reliance. More and more individuals are taking health into their own hands, and that is driving the personalization of health as well. There's a few other things here, but we've got a lot to get through, so I'm not going to spend an incredible amount of time on that side of things. But if we look at the blowout trends across the market, it's always important to set the scene. We have an explosion of technology. I think the tech players right now, the technology exists, it's kind of how they package it and bring it out that's been so interesting. Seeing virtual reality become a treatment. What we're seeing more and more is digital forms of medicine that are being administered and kind of even challenging prescriptions of pills. And I'll talk about an example of that too. It really is the rise of the consumer. And having more patient centricity is not just a buzzword, it's a reality. Patients are going to make more decisions. They are the payer in many regards. So we're seeing a lot more direct-to-consumer play within healthcare too. Policy is really important. If you follow policy, you can kind of see where things are going to go. Telehealth has existed for years and years. It took a pandemic and it took policy to make it happen. So the US is a fantastic example of that. If you look at the work that the American Telemed Association have been doing, they were lobbying for telehealth policies, for fair reimbursement for years. The pandemic hit and all of those policies fell into place. They now have a big job to do to make sure we don't roll back, that we continue the momentum, that doctors are paid fairly for consultations done virtually as much as they would be for a face-to-face, because that impacts the usage of it and the delivery of it. Personalization of health. This is where genomics has a really big play. This idea of a one-size-fits-all health is really not going to fly. And it's not going to fly for the upcoming generations. If you look at the Gen Z and then the alphas that are young right now, they are certainly going to expect a personalized world, their smartphone first generation. And this kind of belief is that we are going to have our genome data helping us understand our predictive diseases. What do we anticipate to become an illness? All the way through to, actually, I have this disease, but what's the right kind of treatment for me based on my genome and based on my genetics? Aging population. We're living longer, but we're not necessarily living well. We don't have enough doctors being trained. We don't have enough hospital infrastructure. So that really is a problem. And technology and smart homes are seen to be a real enabler here. So the Consumer Electronics Show, which was virtual this year, showed some incredible technology around touch points in the home, how we can make it safer, how we can make it more frictionless to take care of individuals as they age, so they can age in place rather than be taken out of their home. Digital therapeutics. This is clinically validated digital therapies. And I'll give you some very clear examples of digital therapeutics. Problem right now for digital therapeutics, even though in terms of investment, it's seen as the future, pharma clients and tech clients are investing heavily in digital therapeutics, but the marketplace hasn't been prepared for it. So it's a really interesting space that digital therapeutics is in right now. It's clinically validated tools without a clear workflow of how they will be in the hands of patients and able for doctors to prescribe them. So we have a workflow issue happening. With workflow comes electronic medical records. Electronic medical records have been the cause of a lot of physician burnout over the years. There's many papers about it too. And there's a monopoly with certain players. And I think what's been frustrating is it's taken a long time for those systems to open up and allow other apps to be integrated within their EMR system. Because unless it's there at a click of a button, a doctor is not going to prescribe those products. And that's been a huge challenge for the field. And finally, wearables. The wearable grew up. I remember the first few years when everyone was going mad about all these step trackers and T-shirts with sensors. But now it's about sophistication and even fashion. Fashion is going really cool with wearables. So, you have smartwatches now becoming really ubiquitous with people using them. Other forms of jewelry with more discrete sensors in them as well. So I think the wearables market is very interesting in that sense. Definition is really key. One of the biggest things that even discussed at JP Morgan, the investor conference at scale, is we have a definition problem in digital health. What is it? Is it a wearable? Is it a digital therapy? Is it digital? It's so many words. So there's been a lot of effort by the industry to find better definition. And these are just some links to go to if you want to know what the accurate definitions are. And I think there's been a lot of work done to try and bring the industry together. So while digital and connected health is the umbrella term, underneath that, there are all these other types of solutions and support systems which are clinically validated and have real-world evidence attached to them. We know COVID's been an enabler to technology really rising with the role of telehealth virtual care. I'll show you a stat in a moment of just how many people were pushed into a virtual consultation for the first time around the world. This wouldn't have happened You know, it was forced. The question is now, how do we learn from it? Now that this technology is in the hands of doctors and patients, how do we make this now really shaped for the future of health so it can still be super convenient, but also appropriate? There's a lot of conversation in the industry right now, what is appropriate for a virtual consultation and what is not. Self-testing. There was a lot of products coming to market which require you to test yourself at home. And there was a big consumer barrier of, well, I'll just go to a clinic and get tested. Like, it's not a behavior that I expect to do in my home. And many companies like Babylon Health were trying to create a diagnostic piece of their telehealth platform, which just wasn't moving. But again, COVID has changed that. We're becoming familiar with testing ourselves. We're becoming more trusting of that. So I think that's going to be an interesting space, seeing more swab kits go out to people to take a swab and then to have a personalized kit come to their home based on the data. Chatbots are also a big investment space. I think when you have a lot of people with the similar type questions, a chatbot is a really scalable way of getting there. And again, COVID became that space. What's interesting now is there's a lot of investment in symptom trackers. So to help individuals spot symptoms or issues that they may have, a lot of clients are investing in chatbots and screening tools on different websites and on phone to get people to have an interesting conversation with their doctor. So the end of that chatbot is, okay, here's what you should take to your doctor, and these are some of the things we think you should discuss with them. It's not going to diagnose you, but it could guide you. And with all of that, with all this data, where we can target our resources better, population health is incredible if we get it right. You know, imagine the insurance companies now, how much data they have on their pool of individuals that are signed up. You know, being able to triage and understand, okay, these people are tracking their health, doing X number of steps, and they're not using our services as much. So how can we then, you know, get those kind of performance metrics for other parts of our insurance? So these are the types of conversations that are happening with population health. We've been tracking all sorts of things because we're a data house and we enjoy that. So one of the big things is telehealth and telemedicine. And the horizontal line you see there is the incidence of use. So this was a snapshot in time. This was done in June or July of 2020. So really the pandemic happened in the midst of things and everyone was in lockdown. And we just assessed how many people were having a telehealth consultation from the general population. And you can see in China and India, they're the outlier countries, there was a huge incidence of use. China has been leading the way as a country for many years on digital health. It had policies in place back in 2012, you know, so they were really ahead of the game. Europe was slower. So some of the policies in Europe have only come slower in terms of time. But what you're seeing is that not only is the usage kind of going to continue to grow, but a lot more people are using it for the first time. They're having this new experience, and it's been really interesting to tap into that and understand, like I said before, what's working and what's not. The other big news of digital and connected health that happened towards the latter part of last year was the merger between Teladoc Health and Livongo. It was 38 billion in size, and it really was an interesting move because you have a telehealth company, one of the biggest telehealth players, now bringing on board a digital therapeutics company, which have remote monitoring tools, which have AI-based, symptom trackers and algorithms, and they're bringing the two things together. And what they're creating is an end-to-end virtual care service. So now imagine you book your appointment on Teladoc, you see your clinician, the clinician says, okay, cool, I will see you again in 6 weeks, but I want you to do X, Y, Z. And from a press of a button, they can have the Livongo kit sent to the patient's home. And that data will automatically stream back into Teladoc Health ecosystem. So it's creating an end-to-end virtual care platform. And it's kind of been the thing that's missing. So I feel like this is where the market's going. We're going to see more partnerships of this nature. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this goes. There's still a lot being figured out. This, of course, is the data era of technology. It's not about the hardware. It very much is about the software. And software can now be a medical device in itself. It's the algorithms that have the value, not what you package them in. So things like 5G, artificial intelligence, robotics, the role of voice, these are having huge impact in the development arm of digital and connected health. We must think about 5G because if you don't have broadband or access to internet, all of these solutions dissipate, they don't exist. And we get sometimes a bit overconfident about actually the world isn't fully equipped to have access to internet. And we have a lot of issues, even just in, I'm based in London, and we have hotspots here where you can't even get, good data coverage. So that is a reality. And so we can't really achieve the real vision of digital health unless we have the access and the speed of the internet to the point that we need it to. I think we're in an era of narrow AI. We do really well when we're focused with our algorithms, when we know we need to achieve a particular goal, but we're not really in general AI, which is just, allowing things to happen, allowing a much more immersive kind of, let's see where the robot goes and what happens as it learns over time. So there's a lot of narrow AI products in the market, and robotics is a growing area. We're going to see more moving products in the home. If you look at the patents that are happening, a lot of them involve a form of robotics for smart homes. So I think that's going to be a very interesting space. The vision for primary care is something like this. Different forms of data streaming together. You sitting with your doctor, not him or her on one side of the table and you on another. You can both see your health data because it's yours. And you can have an interesting and collaborative conversation about your health. This is what the aspiration really should be. This idea of true primary care, which directs us, which is collaborative in nature, powered by good data, which is in some places happening, but it's only happening for those that can afford it, for those that have the really premium insurance. That's going to create health inequity, and that's a concern as well, right? Is digital health only for those that can afford it? So there's going to be a lot of infrastructure questions that we have to deal with. The other really important space is pharmacy. This is all retail space. This is a CVS. They've taken out all that retail space and they've created a health hub because they also see the future of health being very much in the community setting. So being able to do chronic disease management at a pharmacy level, being able to help people on board onto a remote monitoring device, understand good sleep hygiene or how to do better sleep, all of these kind of better health and wellness things will start to move to a community setting, to a pharmacy, which makes complete sense. It's more accessible. It shouldn't take over time at a primary care level, but for that to work, we need the incentives and the reimbursement to also follow. So often these things are led again by policy for this to really become a reality. I'm going to just talk through a few of the connected health kind of launches and some particular news stories which I think have been quite interesting. One of the big news stories was Proteus Digital Health. Proteus was a smart pill manufacturer. They created a pill which has a sensor in it, which can tell you real time that you've taken that medicine. Unfortunately, the ambition they had was so big, they had to disrupt the entire supply chain of how pills are created, and it wasn't scalable. So they had to file for bankruptcy, and Otsuka Pharmaceuticals have taken over the IP and are committed to creating smart pills across their range. But this is not something that's going to necessarily happen across every pharma company, which I think was the ultimate vision of Proteus. But what they've done and achieved, and it took them 15 years to get this to market, and they did get it to market, but just seeing it through and making sure that the reimbursement model worked was just too much of a tough ask at that stage. But I think it's just a fascinating story, and what they've achieved has been incredible. One of the biggest areas of investment is genome sequencing, and Illumina are really pushing hard in this space. Tests which used to cost thousands and thousands are now available for $400. That's what Illumina are doing. They're bringing genome sequencing to the consumer. That price point is only going to come down. And that's when I think it's going to be extremely interesting. And what they do is they not only have the tests and the results, but they have healthcare advisors, health coaches, which help interpret and provide a tailored kind of health plan, so you can kind of improve your health or understand what you need to do to improve your health kind of future. Things like this is an example of personalized vitamin sets that will come to your home after you take a swab, because they'll know what you're lacking more in and what you're more deficient on, and therefore give you a more personalized set of pills through the post. Coming on to digital therapeutics, Akili Interactive have made a lot of noise in the market, and rightly so. They, very early on, took on the challenge of attention deficit disorder among children and felt very passionately about the fact that we shouldn't be giving pills to kids. They also understood that a lot of these things are cognitive, right? This is based on, if we use mindfulness, we use certain kind of cognitive tools and techniques, we can help individuals to better concentrate and find other ways. They brought on board psychologists, they brought on board behavioral scientists, and then their kind of medical community to start producing a gaming interactive app, which allows children to engage and learn those techniques. They spent all of their R&D on refining the game and doing clinical trials, the randomized control trials, where they had a control arm where children with ADHD took the pill, and then an arm who were using the gaming product that they had created. And they were running a bunch of quality of life metrics, doing a number of ADHD tests to see if improvements happened through the gaming program. I think it's a 6-week program or something. And they finally had the endpoints. They finally had the data to show that by using this, you can replace the pill. It's as effective as pill therapy if adhered to and if completed. They have now launched, they kind of accelerated their launch during COVID, and they're now available in the US. And they have a whole pipeline. They're not going to stick to ADHD. They have a whole pipeline of areas that they're focused on, from autism to depressive disorder, MS. They're running particular trials to see how they could use things like virtual reality, gaming, even augmented reality to help equip us better to deal with the symptoms and the fallout of having these conditions. There also is a whole stream of digital therapeutics which come with a pill. So that's just one example of replacing a pill, but majority actually are with a pill. So Voluntis, which is a French-owned company, they have one of the longest heritages actually for digital therapeutics. They created Insulia, which is for diabetes. They've done partnership with different pharma clients, and they offer their app. It's a remote monitoring tool which helps with reminders around your insulin, measuring your kind of quality of life, and your general adherence to treatment through the app, and it gives you advice and guidance. Those that use it have better outcomes than those that don't, and that's where they've been able to get reimbursement. They've also now moved into oncology. Oncology is, of course, is a huge area. The pipeline for oncology is incredible, right? So what's interesting here is they observed deeply the issues that were going on for certain cancer patients, and it's really side effects. That's the real pain point that they found and they focused on. And they thought, okay, can we do something about the side effects? Because that's what's really bringing these particular cancer patients down. And that's how they created Alina, their product for oncology. It's a companion to help you manage the side effects of cancer treatment, and also has a social aspect to it too. So you can pivot individuals into communities or particular platforms where they can engage with other patients. There's a number of things out there, but I'm conscious of time. So I'm going to say, do check out the CES website if you want to see a cool tech that's out there at the moment. We do talk to doctors quite often about how they see digital and connected health, and I'm going to share some very hot off the press data as well in a moment. But what's interesting is doctors are for it, even before the pandemic, before they were even further pushed. They were very much for digital and connected health. And they saw the benefits in terms of compliance to treatment, not just actually compliance to treatment, but compliance to advice. One of the most infuriating things for doctors is when they give advice and it's not followed, and then the results aren't there. And so that's a cycle. So they see digital health being a real enabler for better compliance to treatment. Early intervention, if you know better, you do better. So I think having the advice, the guidance, symptom trackers and things like that will pivot people to get the advice they need sooner. And there's an economic argument for digital health. It can reduce practice visits. You can do follow-ups virtually. You could do check-ins through it. It makes sense in terms of costs as well. But their concerns are around patients misinterpreting data. We do have some design issues with many apps that exist in the market. A lot of them are created in, a lot of the development arm is in the US or things like that, but they're made generally English speaking first and then translated and then moved on. So often these are created for native English speakers. There's a lot of things around, some of them not even following some of the best practices for people that have visual impairment or need different kinds of solutions. So there has been issues with some of the tech. And so doctors do need to see a bit more confidence around the design of some of these solutions and make sure that patients can easily understand the information that's being present to them. Concern around diagnoses. If a product is promising a diagnosis, it's a no-go for doctors, but I don't think many are. Most products say, this is some information for you, but go speak to your doctor. They still are giving that final, obviously that final say is going to be with a doctor. But the idea of these diagnostic devices is a bit something that makes them wary. And finally, data security and privacy. Tech goes hand in hand with issues around security and privacy. I think there's a lot to be concerned about. Who owns the data? You know, who owns it? How is it used? How transparent are we about that? I think these are things which are going to continue to be very hot topics as we see more and more health products released with a digital component. What we have launching next month, and my life right now is this project, is Digital Doctor 2021. So next month we will be launching this. It's a fresh data set looking at over 14 countries and primary care physicians and understanding how they're faring with things like telehealth, digital therapeutics, what they see as the future of health and those things. So for sure, through Lone and the team, we'll be sharing content as and when that releases. But what's interesting, and these are just some signals from the data that I can share, what's interesting is there's an acceptance that remote consultations are here to stay. We've seen a huge shift. I mean, the trend line numbers are pretty stunning when you see what was happening. We have data pre-COVID, and now we have it during, and we can see the line is incredible for how many doctors now are using telehealth and virtual care for the first time, and some of the learnings that they've had from that. And what's heartening is they definitely see a future for it. You know, not for everything, not for every element of the patient journey, but it certainly has a role to play. And I think that's a really interesting space. There's been so much that COVID has accelerated for doctors. So it's accelerated the use of tech and the acceptance of it. It's been a huge learning curve. A few call outs here, I'd say, is there's some concerns here really around how they can be empathetic during a consultation. The role of empathy in care is something which tech may not be enabling, and that's something that's a concern for the market. The other thing we need to consider is clinician burnout. The use of tech, being on screens, having to learn so much, has increased workload, and it hasn't necessarily been easy for doctors. There's a lot for them to take on board. So I think it's an interesting time, and this is just a snippet. There's so much more we can share, but I hope that you'll be in touch about that. I think in terms of the next 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to give you a few examples of business models. I think that's always a hot topic, right? How are these things, how can you make money from these things was a big question that kept coming up to me when I was presenting before, and what are people doing to kind of get there? One of the most important things is having robust data. Think about what data you collect up front. Has always been my advice to clients. You know, I think You go so far down the line and then start thinking, well, what are the clinical endpoints of your product? You should be thinking about that up front. What's the problem you're trying to solve? And what data do you need to show to payers to prove it out? The other thing are hygiene factors around data security, having good data management, understanding the regulatory framework of healthcare, which we all know is a minefield in itself. Some of the things that you would be looking for is proxies. There's a lot of real world data available out there that you could use as a proxy for, okay, well, this has shown that by doing steps, your quality of life metric increases by X, and that could be building a value story around a product that you're creating. Having doctors on board, they're a very key stakeholder. If you have testimonials from doctors that they like your product, it makes a big difference to payers. Thinking about real world data, having what data collected over time is really important, but also thinking about the workflow. Yeah, you can have the best product in the world, but if you don't have a good access plan, it won't go anywhere. So how are people going to access it? A lot of apps start direct to consumer. So Headspace is always a great one. It's a mindfulness app. It's one of the top ones. And they started direct to consumer. It was a product that was out there, available, started off for free to get as much feedback as possible, refine. Then they started adding a subscription to it to unlock features. So then they had some money, revenue coming in from a direct to consumer. They then thought, they showed collecting data and they're showing actually that there's a lot of benefits for individuals. And they started to go to employer benefit insurance companies. So to the big FMCG companies and say, well, why don't you offer Headspace to your employees? It's a stress buster, helps with sleep, will increase your productivity by X. They created a value story and then employers took the app on board and they had a revenue stream from that. They've now got to the stage where they want to become a prescription digital therapeutic. So they have so much evidence to show the positive outcomes of using their Headspace product that it could be used early as first line even, or in combination with counselling and therapy. So if people have anxiety, for instance, and present to the doctor, well, why not prescribe them Headspace and have it paid for as part of their insurance or part of their, if you're part of the UK, it'd be the NHS. So it's really interesting. I think this is an example of how many of the companies are going. They're pivoting. They start D2C and then they will start to think about other ways to kind of bring revenue in. I think what it takes to really create a strong product is having a very clear understanding of the unmet need. I have so many products that have been created without a clear understanding of what you're trying to solve. What is the exact problem that you're trying to solve? And to understand problems, you need to do things like journey mapping. Like if you look at a doctor's day, understand their day, understand the highs and lows, understand their underlying motivations, get that deep kind of qualitative ethnographic lens before you create a solution. Because until you understand your customer's unmet need and their context, it's very tough to create a solution that's going to be market leading. Know who your customers are going to be. How are you going to actually get the product to market? Who's going to access it? Who's going to buy it? Start to know that up front. Have a clear sense of your value story. By using your product, what's the benefit? Are you impacting anything that's currently a health cost or an issue? Are you a nice to have or are you a must have? Engage payers early in the process. A lot of clients get a bit concerned about speaking to payers, but honestly, you've got to talk to insurance companies. You've got to understand what evidence you need to generate if you really want to make a business in digital and connected health. And then feedback is your number one thing. Get as much feedback as possible, as often as possible. I'll close up with a final example with Sleepio. I think again, just when I think about success, like a successful story in digital health, I do think of Sleepio. It started as clinical psychologists who just saw that cognitive behavioral therapy could be packaged in an app in a really smart way. It was already happening. There were cognitive behavioral therapy programs happening around the UK, and so these psychologists were like, okay, we can put this into a computer, but why not put it into an app, and then why don't we start rolling it out? And the rollout was really successful. The feedback was really strong. And then they started to collect data and publish it. They were really rigorous about constantly publishing and getting things out there on PubMed, which is very popular amongst doctors as well, really getting it credibility that, hey, you know, people who use our program, they're sleeping better. Look, we're showing you side-by-side data of placebo versus the usual treatment, which can be pills, and then the use of Sleepio, and the data was stunning. And then they started to build healthcare economics data. So they're really showing price and money. So if you look at, you know, the stats that they were pulling out of, okay, you can spend X number less because if you have your employees sleeping better, this was what it will generate for you. The NHS took it on board. CVS now have it as part of their formulary. It's a successful business. And I think it's a really great example of a company that has really grown and had evidence at the beginning of what they were doing. So with that, I close up and I pass back to Moan. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Rina. It's really amazing. And one of my questions would have been, you know, like you were initially saying that telemedicine in the US really got a huge step forward during the COVID. And I was about to ask, well, what about the other digital healthcare disciplines? Are they as well? And you already showed that this is actually, it's a general trend across all disciplines that the digitization has been increasing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It has been steadily increasing, but the pandemic has certainly pushed over. Yeah. Still think, from what we're seeing at the moment with Digital Doctor in particular, there's still a lot, the doctors are fairly overwhelmed with how much tech is available to them, and we have a huge workflow issue. So things like, so a keenly interactive gaming product, for instance, like amazing. Why wouldn't you want? However, if it's not available on the system for the doctor, if they don't know how to prescribe and then monitor that, they're going to be nervous about doing it. So we have certain, the other thing we have with doctors is archetypes. We have the early adopters, the ones that are willing to take more risks. We have those that are very cautious and waiting. So there may be elements of digital health right now, but they're not fully in at the moment. Yeah, it's definitely come a long way if you look at where it was a few years ago.
And we are talking about a major disruption within both the healthcare sector, but also within the life science industry as such. And managing the disruption, we recently had another insight on how to manage it, and it goes really broad. And it's not only about implementing the digitalization, but as well also to take care of all the processes, all the organizational change and so forth. And how it must have some huge challenges to actually have these different mindset, these different processes into a really conservative sector like the healthcare sector, and how are we actually going to prepare also the young doctors or the next generation or the generation that is now? How are we going to really take care of this disruption and this change in comparison or following it?
Yeah, it's really tough, you know. I think a lot, what I'm seeing a lot in terms of targeted campaign work, is the younger doctors are already first and more likely to do all these things. So they're and if anything, they've been slightly stifled by the senior doctors that they, you know, who aren't so familiar and therefore are more reluctant. We've actually seen a huge increase in social media use amongst doctors, particularly younger doctors, and the sharing of expertise and skills with one another, and even posting online. So I think how they acquire information is going to evolve, and that will have an impact as well. So there's lots of programs, CME credited programs that are trying to improve digital health understanding, provide training, but until the workflow is sorted out, that's still going to be an issue. But I think the mindset is moving. It's slower in certain sectors, and to some degree, these younger doctors are the ones to focus on and target a bit more, because they're going to be, they're already in. They just want to know what's the best.
Yeah, and still, have the universities integrated, for example, the training for the digitalization in their studies and so on? I mean, from what I know, it is more driven by the actual interest and the habits of the students in the medicine, and taking the whole. For example, as you were mentioning, also all these securing the data and GDPR and all these things has to be integrated as well in the study, in the learning, in the training of the doctors, and that's I haven't seen that much activity in that respect.
Yeah, I think it's quite surface level right now. So it's kind of like, these are the trends that are happening, and this is there's some really big influencers in healthcare. So those that are kind of following the space. You've got the medical futurist, who's a doctor based in Hungary, who really is pushing, and he's doing a lot of advocacy work. And we have a number of other people as well who are prominent in the space, trying to say that we need to educate the upcoming doctors. But I think the questions are far. Right. And I think there's still a question of, well, what does the role, particularly for primary care, what's the role for, because that's where I think the biggest disruption is going to be. I think specialists definitely are much more savvier, because they're deeply on therapy area, and therefore they want everything about that therapy area. They want to be ahead of the game often, and they have more detailed CME courses to go on, and they get much better sales rep activity where they get much more personalized updates. But I think the challenge is at primary care.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think, obviously the life sciences industry is also evolving quite a lot. And we even have also experienced that some of the characteristics and the criteria for the people being hired into the life science industry also are coming with a technology background, and for example, even within Spengler Fox, we have an industry sector of technology, and then we have the life sciences. But we have really bridged these two disciplines, because they are definitely going hand in hand, and IT and digitalization is definitely crossing or going across all industries, actually, both within healthcare and healthcare, life sciences, and other industries as well. So we see also a different demand for profiles in the life science sector as such. So it is impacting a great deal, not only on the individual hospital healthcare sector as such, but definitely also impacting a lot of other things, a lot of other disciplines as such.
Yeah, I mean, new roles, right? Brand new roles, new teams, new verticals, and a lot of learning, right? I mean, there's about the turnover as well of people, because it's just so difficult. It's so new. A lot of work to be done in terms of, this is a fast-moving space, and money hasn't moved quickly. The R&D cycle is so much shorter, and there's a lot of pressure for results. I was talking to someone today, and you have to bring something to market in a year. Here's a huge budget, but then you have to make it within that year. I'm like, well, that's tough.
Yeah. So there are actually no questions, maybe overwhelmed by how much you covered actually, Rena, but I think I'll wrap it up here and thank you and your team for this interesting information, and yeah, hope to get an update soon. And as you were saying, was it the next month that you're going to have some new survey data upcoming?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so yeah, I will be promoting heavily on LinkedIn, no doubt. So I hope to see you all log on and check us out there. But yeah, we'll be sharing the latest data for Digital Doctor, which is coming out next month. So yeah, that'll be the next big release. And for sure, we'll keep in touch and share things through you as well to your clients. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy.
Thank you, and do follow us on LinkedIn. We will share everything. So take care out there and have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Bye-bye.